Thank you. All righty. Let me do. I need to get to this. Move out of my way, please. Thank you. Okay, let's see. There we go. You're up there now. Can you see eco identity, or is it slightly covered?
Can see it.
Can see it.
Okay. Okay. Good, good. All righty. All right. So I find myself at a teeter-totter between hybrid religion, spirituality, or not interested in pursuing any, and simply wanting to nurture relationships and reciprocity with trees in the more than human world. While I don't consider myself an expert on nature or trees, I identify as their dear friend, committed, caring, and invested in deepening our bond through reciprocal relationship and mutual understanding. I'm a curious learner, interested in the shift from approaching nature as a collection of objects to a communion of subjects. And that is from Thomas Berry in Lors's book. I'm intentional about building relationships with the more than human world and attending to and centering their voices. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means policy-wise to center the voices. What is the state of your relationship with nature? That's a question from Toko Paterner. What is the state of your relationship with nature? That might be a nice beginning question that you could ask a group that's coming together for the first time, like say you had a public group. You could almost ask it, I would maybe change it and say like, what's the quality of your relationship with nature? It seems a little bit more specific. I am in Denver, and we can talk about identifying on certain lands, and within nature companionship, there will be a part of the art. One second, there's some dogs here. So some of the tension for me is the potential for like being performative when I'm giving a land acknowledgement. So I feel very true to what I'm going to share with you about what I share when I'm in Chicago. And being here in Denver, like my tension was it felt and feels performative to share a land acknowledgement from where I am in this moment. I just don't know enough. So I'm going to share with you what I share in Chicago, and then you're going to write your own as part of your nature companionship flow. In Chicago, we're located on the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and Sac and Fox, also call this area home. The region has long been a center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. Today, one of the largest Indigenous communities resides in Chicago. Members of this community continue to contribute to the life of the city and to contribute their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the land and waterways. Just until recently, Illinois was the only state that didn't have a reservation. It's a very, very complicated place to be in. But I just wanted to talk through with you just at the beginning in brief about the tension that I feel around that. So I hope that we can explore that, and you can also do your own self-examination around what is true for you. There might be an Indigenous group that asks you to read specifically. So what I just read is very similar to what in Milwaukee, some Indigenous people have been asked to share. Milwaukee's like right on Lake Michigan, an hour and a half north of where we are in Chicago. So here we start with the very kind of premise beyond what I just talked about for a land acknowledgement is the forest as the guide. So I know some of you here are trained as spiritual directors, and sometimes within the practice of spiritual direction or spiritual companionship, we talk about how we get out of the way and let mystery enter in. And it doesn't dissolve us of needing skills with listening and, et cetera, but it does allow for there to be an understanding, a mutual understanding that there's something bigger here than just me and this group or just me and this person in the natural world. Robin Wall Kimmerer says it like this: the land is the real teacher. Paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world, receiving the gifts with open eyes and open heart. My job, and she's talking here about when she took students, biology students, my job was just to lead the students into the presence and ready them to hear. I really see that as foundational to what we're doing. Basically, getting out of the way, but in a skillful way, leading them into the presence and ready them to hear. The land knows you even when you're lost. Let the forest guide, and we get out of the way. If there are any quotes that you all need, by the way, let me know and I'll put them in chat. You also will have them here on the recording, but if you'd rather just like have it in the chat and capture it elsewhere, please just let me know. Interbeing. Do you know this term? This comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. There's a couple of quotes here. One is from Margaret Renkl, R-E-N-K-L. One of her books, The Comfort of Crows, is on our recommended list. The very least I owe my wild neighbors is a willingness to witness their struggle, to compensate for their losses in every way I can, and to speak on their behalf about all the ways I can't. It's my dearest hope that you will do the same for your own wild neighbors. And Joan, this is maybe getting at what you were talking about. She says, rejoice and grieve. Do your best to help. Bear witness when you can't. Remember the crows who tell us that we belong to one another and to them. Interbeing from Thich Nhat Hanh is a concept of everything relying on everything else. It's that we do not exist independently. We inter-are. We inter-are. There's a biologist named Lewis Thomas whose work I appreciate very much. And he describes how our human bodies are shared, rented, and occupied by countless other tiny organisms, without whom we couldn't move a muscle, drum a finger, or think a thought. Our body is a community, and the trillions of non-human cells in our body are even more numerous than the human cells. Without them, we could not be here in this moment. Without them, we wouldn't be able to think, to feel, or to speak. These are, he said, There are, he says, no solitary beings. The whole planet is one giant, living, breathing cell with all its working parts linked in symbiosis. The whole planet is one giant, living, breathing cell with all its parts linked in symbiosis. One of our authors is Ben Page. This is one of our required reading authors. And he writes, as we become more aware that we are nature, we move toward a sense of interbeing. Challenging our notions of separateness, we dissolve our eco-identity, and it is never ours alone. So I think that's one of the ways like that, kind of putting on the clothing of dissolving our eco-identity as it's never ours alone, and allowing the forest to be the guide. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to put a link in chat. It's a blog that I wrote about this concept. I wrote it for SGTI, the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute, and I want to give you a moment to read it. So I'm going to put the link in the chat and give you a moment to read it. So I'm just going to pause the recording so there's not going to be tons of space. So you're going to get to hear the wonderful, I don't know, person, bot. The next one is withness. And withness is a concept that is from one of my favorite scholars named Bayo Akomolafe, Akomol, Akomo, Afe, Akomolafe, Bayo. And I want to talk about withness by telling a story. This is a story of an experience I had a few summers ago. One early summer day, I was kayaking on the Chicago River, looking out for wildlife. After nearly 30 minutes of paddling, I noticed a very large beaver reaching for some hanging leaves from a tree on the river's shore. I slowed down and observed the beaver, who, with increasing determination, straightened up on her two hind feet to reach even higher into the tree, where she beheld more green nourishment. Encountering the beaver during her dinner feast was so delightful that my heart rate increased, and I felt a sense of wonder, awe, and gratitude spread throughout my entire body. The moment renewed my practice of witnessing rather than helping, saving, dominating, fixing, or teaching. Bayo Akomolafe might say that I participated in witnessing the interconnection between the beaver, the tree, the river, and me, the sense of me as a part of a larger whole. And not only did I witness nature, but nature also witnessed me, because nature is me. Nature is a part of me. We witness, sorry, so how Bayo Akomolafe would define witness is he'd say there's no thinking that's not a thinking with. There's no becoming that's not a becoming with. No witnessing that's not a witnessing. No seeing that is not a breaking asunder to make space for something quite different in this modern world of ours. The modest idea that we're not fixed and that we're vaster than our categories and classifications permit us to be. Maybe this is connected to the concept I brought in earlier of non-sovereign agency.
We're in a liminal space, kind of beyond the ordinary of unity and connection.
Yeah, I think about, so a little thought question for reflection here, just to spend a couple of minutes, is to think about an experience that you've had in the natural world where you felt a sense of witness. Maybe you didn't have that terminology at the time, but you knew that you were held by all of the beings around you. It's like I read something about an artist recently who died in January, and um, and the writer of this article said there were three artists. This was a indigenous painting on rock. There were, and then so here's the story. There were three artists, but what happened was a bear had come and like clawed through some of the etching. And the three artists were the original artist, and then the bear was the artist, and then the rock formation in the wind. So I guess maybe that would be four. I think that what the author was saying was like they were all witnessing each other, even though they were in different timing. So I'm going to be quiet here and pause for a minute for you to consider a time where you really experienced this interconnection of you as a part of the larger whole. Just quiet contemplation here for a minute. Anybody want to share? All right, who knows this phrase, shizen? It's a Japanese concept. It's a principle of Zen aesthetics. So Sumie is very Zen-y. A principle of Zen aesthetics, the idea behind it, it means nature or naturalness. And the idea behind it is that we're all connected to nature, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And that the more closely something relates to nature, the more pleasing it is. So let's do a little experiment here. Take a look at something around you where you are, like whether it's the table, a writing utensil, a glass, even the computer. The more closely something relates to nature, the more pleasing it is. A spoon a piece of furniture, the way the house is decorated. The patterns on a kimono are often of the natural world. You can be wrapped in peonies. You can be wrapped in cherry blossoms, chrysanthemums, even whole landscapes of rivers and mountains. That definition comes from Ching Li, who wrote the book called Forest Bathing, and it's on the recommended list. It is a gorgeous book. One of my teachers says it's kind of like a bedside book because if you don't even need to read a lot, you can just look at the photographs and fall asleep having these images of plum blossoms and cherry blossoms in your mind as you drift off. I want to connect this concept of Shizen, the more closely something connects or relates to nature, the more pleasing it is. That's why I love the interior of Japanese homes. Oh, amazing. So much wood, so much bamboo. I want to connect that with something that Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about. She says this: what would it be like, I wondered, to live with that heightened sensitivity to the lives given for ours? In that awareness, looking over the objects on my desk, the basket, the candle, the paper, I delight in following their origins back to the ground. I twirl my pencil, a magic wand, lathed from incense cedar, between my fingers. The willow bark in the aspirin, even the metal of my lamp, asks me to consider its roots in the strata of the earth. But I notice that my eyes and thoughts pass quickly over the plastic on my desk. I hardly give the computer a second glance. I can muster no reflective moment for plastic. It's so far removed from the natural world. I wonder if that's a place where the disconnection began. The loss of respect when we could no longer easily see the life within the object. And yet, I mean no disrespect for the diatoms and marine invertebrates with 200 million years, who 200 million years ago lived well and fell to the bottom of an ancient sea, where under great pressure of a shifting earth, they became oil that was pumped from the ground to a refinery, where it was broken down to make this case of my laptop or the cap of the aspirin bottle. Every once in a while, with a basket in hand, or a peach or a pencil, there's that moment when the mind and spirit open to all the connections, she writes, to all the lives and our responsibility to use them well. And just in that moment, I can hear John Pigeon say, slow down. It's 30 years of a tree's life you've got in your hands there. Don't you owe it a few minutes to think about what you'll do with it? And if you have Braiding Sweetgrass, that is from pages 154 to 155. I don't know if you have the same version as I do. I want to pause here with this concept of Shizen and think about the clothes you're wearing. Not just where they came from, but who they came from. I'm wearing wool socks. Where the wool came from. And this cotton shirt that I'm wearing. One of our assignments is going to be about holding an object, like having an object in your pocket and just walking with that object and seeing what happens. I'm going to move to the next concept. Species loneliness. Species loneliness is written about in Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And here is her definition. Philosophers call this state of isolation and disconnection. So a state of isolation and disconnection, species loneliness, a deep, unnamed sadness stemming from estrangement from the rest of creation, from the loss of relationship. As our human dominance of the world has grown, we've become more isolated, more lonely when we can no longer call out to our neighbors. As our human dominance of the world has grown, we've become more isolated, more lonely when we can no longer call out to our human neighbors, to our neighbors, meaning human and more than human neighbors. I've had a curiosity about loneliness since learning about this concept. And how we might support humans in their loneliness through connection with relationship with the natural world. I'm going to pause the share and the recording, and we'll take a moment for some journaling. And when I say journaling, talked about forest as guide, interbeing, witness, Shizen, species loneliness, and bring a little science in here, biophilia. This phrase comes from E.O. Wilson, and the concept is it's the urge to affiliate with other forms of life. The urge to affiliate with other forms of life. So if you're somebody who wants to know the weather, you want to know about your environment, about other life forms, this is deep within us, this urge. What landscapes draw you to them? For some, it's waterfalls, forests, desert, oceans. Are there any that don't draw you to them? Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about, from an indigenous point of view, humans are somewhat lesser than plants. Why? Because plants were here first, and they've had a long time to learn. Plants make food from light and water. Plants feed themselves and us. They provide for the rest of the community. Plants are generous. They are our teachers. What does this urge look like for you? Y'all said yes to this. So that urge is for sure there somewhere, maybe right front and center right now. So what does that urge look like for you? I'd love to hear if anybody wants to share.
For me, it's life under the microscope. I love
Say
seeing
more.
subsections. Oh, so this brings back a lot of memories. I did my bachelor's degree in chemistry, botany, and zoology because my goal was to be a microbiologist and then became a molecular biologist, etc. at that time. And it was absolutely fascinating that it was the designs, the subsections of the plants or the tree, not that, well, what's it called, the leaves and the twigs, etc. It was just absolutely incredible. It's like life under the microscope. I don't
Yeah.
know how else to say it. It's
Yeah.
absolutely so alive. Like you had these cells just laughing at, smiling back, and I was like, what? They know I'm here. Hello, kind of thing. It's absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Jan. What does the urge look like for you? Who else would like to share?
Having just relocated to this tiny tiny house. I don't like to say tiny living because it's not tiny living. But, having just relocated far from the river and being the heritage is people of the river, it's very difficult to be at a distance from her veins and to not be able to flow with her veins in the way that I'm accustomed to. So I felt this sadness and longing to listen for her and her heartbeat, and it's just been very challenging for me. It's almost a loss. And so on striking the days now, I guess it was Friday, I went to visit a friend who lives on the river. We walk. I just like to spend time on the riverbank, and that was really, really necessary. I felt it, I felt the pull and draw. We need victory in this way.
What was the last thing you said? We need what?
I need to be with her in this way.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of sexual, but it is an intimacy. You needed to connect with her in a way, in a fluvial way. It was not the landlocked way that I was living in, which had its own connections, birds and branches. Yeah, that was important, and I've been so accustomed and I guess spoiled by living on the river for so long. The, the absence of the sound of the river was deafening. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Kaden.
What you said about the river reminds me of Lake Michigan, which I didn't realize that I was part of Lake Michigan until I moved to Evanston and lived near Lake Michigan for 9 years. And I had in Wisconsin 3 different times of about a 15 years total of living near Lake Michigan. And like I said, all I know is that I am in some way Lake Michigan. It's within me, and where that came from living in Arkansas, and in my I was 22 when I first saw Lake Michigan. Where did that connection come from? How was it in me?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Joan. I'll speak as somebody who, when I was a child, I didn't realize how much loneliness, species loneliness, I was experiencing. Going to a public school, having no connection with the seasons apart from getting to school and going home. Now, thankfully, for at least first grade to eighth, I walked to school. Sometimes I biked when I was in high school, even though it wasn't cool. But, you know, some of these classrooms, there aren't windows, or you don't gaze out the window and look at the clouds and the birds. I was visiting a preschool in Hawaii in the mountains, and the preschoolers every single day, this is an indigenous school. The preschoolers every day, they go outside and they ask themselves, what's different? What's different today? It rained last night. Oh, look, the waterfalls. They weren't there yesterday. Every single day. And there was like a big imprint in me when I experienced that. I think that was when I was like, oh, I have been missing as a child connection with the natural world. Seeing the way people respond to urban wildlife, their lack of respect and care. It's like that's just how it was, right? That's how people treat urban wildlife. So part of my loneliness in Chicago when I came back to the city, I grew up in the suburbs. I lived away for 22 years and I came 9 years ago back to the city. Part of my, the loneliness that I felt moving to a new city was buffered by the relationships that I was building with the mourning doves and the cardinals and that funny house finch who comes in February and has like a 10-second call. And I'm like, you're back. You're back. All right, I am going to, we're getting to the end, close to the end of our time. And I want to end with a question and a poem as we go into a break. We're going to have an hour break. And I sent you all an email with an attachment. In that attachment were instructions to prepare for the break. You can be anywhere you want, including indoors and outdoors. I wanted to start out this training with Phyllis because nature companionship is not forest bathing, and there are aspects that are like forest bathing. And Phyllis was my first first facilitator, and is a lovely human, and um, and so she will guide us for like an hour and a half from Hawaii, super early for her. And then after that, we'll debrief and then we'll talk a little bit more and close out our day at 3:30 Central. So the question that I have is a question that comes out of something that Robin Wall Kimmerer explores. And she's talking specifically, I believe, to people who have immigrated here, white folks who have come here, and others who have chosen to immigrate here, other people of color, not forced, but have chosen, and they have 1 foot on land and 1 foot on the boat still. And this is just setting us up for what we're going to talk about, what'll be afternoon for me, which is what would it look like and feel like to have both feet on the land where you are? To really identify with the land where you are. And so this is one of the ways that this is maybe a little bit different than other programs. It's like, who's out your front door? What are the beans just right out your back door? What is that land? I don't need to go to a beautiful national forest. There is nature accessible right out your window. So what would it look like and feel like to plant both feet on the ground? That's the question. And the poem is from Ada Limon. Ada Limon. Limon, accent on the O. This is called Dead Stars. Out here, there's a bowing even the trees are doing. Winter's icy hand at the back of all of us. Black bark, slick yellow leaves, a kind of stillness that feels so mute, it's almost in another year. I am a hearth of spiders these days, a nest of trying. We point out the stars that make Orion as we take out the trash. The rolling containers, a song of suburban thunder. It's almost romantic as we adjust the waxy blue recycling bin until you say, man, we should really learn some new constellations. And it's true. We keep forgetting about them. But mostly we're forgetting we are dead stars too. My mouth is full of dust, and I wish to reclaim the rising. To lean in the spotlight of streetlight with you, toward what's larger within us, toward how we were born. Look, we're not unspectacular things. We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more? To love harder? What if we stood up with our synapses and flesh and said, no, no to the rising tides? Stood for that, the many mute mouths of the sea, of the land. What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth? If we declared a clean night, if we stopped being terrified, if we launched our demands into the sky, made ourselves so big, people could point to us with the arrows they make in their minds, rolling their trash bins out after all of this is over. There are a couple constellations that Ada Limon mentions in this poem I'll name right now. I didn't name them when I was reading them. Antlia, Centaurus, Draco, Lacerta, Hydra, Lyra, Lynx. All right, y'all. What a beautiful time so far. So hopefully the sense of like, whoo, this is a long day on Zoom, there'll be some variety, right, within the Zoom, as we'll see after the break as well with the experience of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing with Phyllis Look. You have the instructions. You can feel free to log off here on the computer or keep it open as you want, but I'll be on my phone at a little park right over here, and you can be wherever you want. Joe.
Yes, could you post that, the dead stars that you just read in the chat?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Also, I'll send out an email probably the day after. That will be the goal of each of our lessons with like, here's what's happening next week. Here's the recording. Here is like Dead Stars from Ada Limon. So if I don't do it in chat, it's because it's too long and I'll send it tomorrow. All right. Have a nice break.